Thank you for coming to the state budget teach-in sponsored by the McKinley Park Progressive Alliance. I want to thank Bill Drew for putting this whole thing together, and I want to thank you all for coming out. So we're going to talk tonight about the impact of Governor Rauner's proposed budget on communities around Illinois. The McKinley Park Progressive Alliance obviously is based in McKinley Park, and you know, many of us here are part of the community, but we wanted to bring a panel to you to talk about a budget that will impact everyone, every single person in the state of Illinois, and give you a chance to learn more about it, to be informed about what's going on in Springfield, and even have a robust discussion about what we can do as individuals, as people who will be affected, who will see our communities affected. So, you know, we have a distinguished panel of experts to talk about their understanding about, you know, the impact of the budget on their communities, their areas of expertise. We have Valerie Leonard, who has worked in the nonprofit sector, and will give her perspective on how the cuts will affect her community. We have Jenny Biggs from Raise Your Hand, who will talk about the impact of the cuts on education and the children in our state. We have Ramon Cañalada, who will talk about the impact on the disabled community, and Lulu Martinez, who's from Enlace Legal Clinic. She'll talk about the impact of the cuts on the immigrant community. And then at the end, we'll have Chuy Garcia come up and sum things up and give his perspective, having been a state senator and currently, you know, as county commissioner. You know, how he thinks that, you know, we can all take action as individuals and members of the community. So, you know, it's a treat to have him here and to give his perspective.
He's got to lead off. He's got to run.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, that's perfectly fine. And also, just before we begin with the panelists, I wanted to just sketch a very basic outline of the state budgeting process for those of you who may not, you know, have any idea about, you know, what that process entails, you know, when things happen, you know, how things happen. Basically, you know, each year the governor proposes a budget for the upcoming fiscal year. The fiscal year starts from July 1st and ends June 30th in each year. We're currently in fiscal year 2015, and many of the things that we're going to be talking about have to do with fiscal year 2016, which begins on July 1st. The legislature is responsible for voting on the budget, and they have until the end of the legislative session, which ends on May 31st of each year. And so, you know, they have until the end of the month. I mean, there's not very much time to, you know, vote on this budget. Although, you know, if they don't have, if they're not able to pass a budget by the deadline, the legislature can go into extended session and meet in the summer to do that. But as I said, for the most part, we'll be talking about the 2016 budget, except you should also know that earlier in April, the governor sent letters to organizations around the state about their spending in the fiscal year 2015 budget. And he basically said that, you know, these organizations who are already granted this money, who have these funds, need to freeze their spending and send back the remainder of the money that they haven't spent. And, you know, these were cuts that were proposed, you know, to programs like indigent burials, autism programs, teen reach, smoking cessation, and a whole, you know, list of other programs. And then, you know, a few weeks later, $26 million of that money was restored because they found, some funds or projected, more revenue than they originally thought. But for the 2016 budget, we still have on the table these draconian cuts. And the purpose is to close a $6 million gap, $6 billion, gap in the budget that, they're expecting. And in a lot of the press statements that the governor and his people have made, there's often a reference to the bad budget that Governor Quinn signed in 2014, and there's an insinuation that, they inherited this problem. It was Governor Quinn's fault. But, I want you to keep in mind that, Governor Quinn's plan, had he been reelected, would have been to push for a maintenance of the 5% temporary tax rate, which would have brought in a lot more revenue, and the budget gap wouldn't have been as big. And, he would have fought for that in the legislature rather than letting that tax increase sunset at the beginning of January, as it did. But because that tax rate went back down to 3.5%, we now have a lot less revenue, and therefore this $6 billion, some say even $9 billion shortfall. And his way of closing that gap is by balancing the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable. And so we're going to hear from our panel about exactly where those cuts fall and how it will affect our communities. Here's Valerie Leonard.
Mr. Garcia.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, we have a change in the order, and we're going to have Commissioner Garcia speak first.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I apologize that I do have another commitment tonight, and thus my going first. A little bit of a overview about the context that Illinois is facing over the next 3 weeks. Unless it comes to some sort of an agreement, it may go into overtime, and the legislative session could be extended. But there are a lot of communications going on in Springfield, and that's when danger is the greatest for the most vulnerable in Illinois, when legislative leaders and the governor can cut a deal to the detriment of the folks who have the least influence, the least power, the least clout in Illinois. So the next 3 weeks, I think, present a heightened time of danger for the groups that have been on the cutting block in terms of the chopping block, in terms of the cuts that were announced by Governor Rauner when he gave his budget address. Before, and we have, of course, experts on the panel that will talk more about the impact of the proposed cuts, especially as negotiations are underway. There have been a variety of reports coming from different media related who are in Springfield trying to make sense of what's going on down there, and we'll hear more about them as the conversation proceeds. I wanted to talk a little bit about both the local and the state context in Illinois in the post-mayoral election, because I think that it is a changed environment in the city of Chicago, one that presents lots of opportunities, given that this past mayoral election was one of the most contested in recent history in Chicago, and one that has created space for actors, for community groups to act in, and different movements to amplify their voices and exert some influence and power, because I think the debate that occurred in the mayoral election, again, has created some space and some new potential opportunities that bode well for people in the neighborhoods and for other groups that are advocating in the public interest. So I think that the post-mayoral election as we approach, of course, the inauguration of the mayor, the mayoral term, and the city council is an opportunity to amplify the voices and the power of community groups throughout Chicago and the neighborhoods. The neighborhoods received a lot of discussion and occupied a lot of space in the mayoral debates, in the mayoral forums that took place. This is an important time for neighborhood groups to continue to exert themselves and to make themselves heard, to occupy the space that has been created. Two, I think it's especially urgent to continue to actively engage city and state lawmakers. In the city council, there's been an influx of new aldermen and women representing wards all over the city of Chicago. The Progressive Caucus has grown its numbers, so there is a new space there. Many aldermen who may have been acting in concert with the mayor's office in the past may be rethinking how they move forward over the next 4 years, so it's an important time to intensify the engagement with members of the city council and, of course, the state legislature. Remember, they will be up for re-election in primaries in the Chicagoland area next March, so it's a good time to be engaged with them. Thirdly, I would argue this is an important time to advance policy proposals and concrete proposals to protect communities, of course, against cuts. That is the focus of tonight's forum, the primary focus, but also against continued efforts to privatize public institution and resources. This is critical, and the next 3 weeks may give us more insight as to what sort of an arrangement the governor and legislative leaders are willing to come to that may feature more aspects of privatization, including things like seeking to make Illinois a right-to-work state, or the other local versions, I forget exactly what they call them, either right to work, right to thrive, right to prosper zones, I'm not sure, but they're all about the same thing when it comes down to enterprise zones, on and on, which don't have a very long track record of producing any jobs, which is how they're primarily marketed. So it's very important to be aware of what goes on there. And then finally, I would say that it's really, really critical to continue to push back and for greater open and inclusive government, both in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. In Chicago, remember that there was a lot of talk about neighborhood investment, that neighborhoods continue to exert themselves, especially those that suffer from the highest levels of unemployment in the Chicago area, and that we begin to see concrete proposals from the Department of Planning and Development, from the mayor's office, about things like critical taxpayer resources like tax increment financing. Where is it justified to create mechanisms to fund projects in Chicago? And if so, in what neighborhoods, and who are stakeholders? So it's very important to continue to push forward to stop the abuse of the tax increment financing, or TIF funds, in Chicago, especially for politically connected and wealthy corporate projects and donors in Chicago. People in the neighborhoods should have a greater say-so, and having oversight committees in tax increment financing districts where they can be justified is essential to have in order to have more accountability. Jobs for youth continue to be a great urgency in Chicago, especially areas that are hard hit by unemployment. But in every community, there is a great need for employment opportunities for young people, especially during the summer months. With all of the talk about cuts and austerity, this is going to continue to be a very challenging area. But if you don't have these opportunities, then the likelihood of increased levels of violence and evil and even for civil unrest to occur is heightened greatly. Lastly, I think that we need to monitor and advance the views of parents and students as the conversations between the Chicago Public Schools officials and the Chicago Teachers Union proceeds. The talk about a potential strike, I think, become more and more likely with each passing day. It is essential that the views and the interest of school children and parents also get magnified, and that they also become important players in this conversation. And lastly, we should not forget, we must not forget that 90% of all the people that voted on February 24th voted for an elected reform school board in the city of Chicago. Chicago remains the only school district in Illinois that does not have an elected school board, so we must not forget, and we must continue to push and advocate for an elected school board. The recent scandals at Chicago Public Schools, the continuing federal investigations of Chicago Public Schools again underscore the need for greater scrutiny, for more oversight and accountability of our school board in the city of Chicago. And then, of course, lastly, we need to continue to push back against the Rauner budget cuts and, of course, as I stated previously, the right to work, making Illinois a right-to-work state, and then some of the other local, what I would say, bribes to get people to think favorably about a right-to-work state, which are these thrive, prosper enterprise zones that don't have any sort of track record of producing employment opportunities or economic growth wherever they've been tried in Illinois for the most part. So I just wanted to come and share that with you, and of course, thank everyone who participated in the last set of elections, both the primary and the runoff. I think they were good for democracy, they were good for the city, so in whatever respect you participated, either as a get out the vote person, as an election judge, as a poll watcher, thank you for making it the most interesting and heated election in Chicago history in a long, long time. And I hope that because of your actions, we'll continue to move the city forward and making it work for everyone, and making it a more transparent and a city that works for all. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Valerie Leonard. I am a resident of North Lawndale, and my day job is consulting to nonprofits, and I just saw my friend Bonnie. I'm sorry. So that's my day job, but what I do for a living is actually live in North Lawndale, fighting every day. You know, every day there's some battle. If it's not TIF abuse, it's closing schools. If it's not closing schools, a few years back, we were gonna be overrun by the Olympics. So now I'm gonna be here to tell you about the budget cuts, how they could potentially impact us, but I also want to share some of the research that I found out about how it could impact you too. So it's not just the extremely low income communities that are being impacted. All of us across the state are being impacted at one level or another. So I want to tell you the worst news first. I guess it's always bad when you talk about your own community and what's happening to you. In North Lawndale, we have about 45% of our people who are living below poverty. So that is, you know, pretty problematic in and of itself. We have Mount Sinai Hospital. That is our #1 employer. And they rely very, very, very heavily upon state funds, particularly Medicaid, for reimbursement. And, you know, Mount Sinai Hospital also serves this area as well. We are in a situation where we have about 68 DHS offices, and when I say DHS, I'm talking about Department of Human Services. So that includes their offices as well as some sub-grantees who provide services such as TANF and other social services, food stamps, and that kind of thing. So when we talk about cutting $1.5 billion to Medicaid, I mean, we're looking at a huge hit to Mount Sinai Hospital, which is our largest employer. We're looking at a huge hit to our community. About 25% of our workforce works in nonprofit, and you compare that to the state where 8% work in nonprofit. So clearly, we are disproportionately dependent upon the state, and it doesn't help that I'm from a community that's like ground zero for privatization of our schools. We just suffered a serious round of school closures and turnarounds. So when we look at what's going on in your community, and when I say your community, I'm talking about McKinley Park proper, but more so zip code 60608 and 60609. So I'm going to hit a broader cross-section of people. Your median income for these two zip codes is about $37,000 per year. Compare that to about $61,000 for the state. About 26% of your residents have incomes that are below the poverty line. And get this one, 77% of the adult population gets insurance from a public source, so that could be Medicare or Medicaid. Only about 22% of the population has private health insurance. So your unemployment rate on average for both zip codes is about 12%, and that's about double what it is for the state. So clearly, you too, I mean, you're not as vulnerable as North Lawndale, but you're vulnerable when it comes to these budget cuts. You have about 98 DHS offices and delegate agencies that service your zip codes at 60608 and 60609, and that translates into about 70% of all of your nonprofits being dependent on state aid. About 17% of your local workforce is employed in healthcare and social services, and that's compared to 8% for the state of Illinois. And then again, for you, just like for North Lawndale, one of your largest employers is Mount Sinai Hospital. And again, 38% of their reimbursement comes from Medicaid. Luckily, your economy is much more diverse than ours, but still, that's an issue. Clearly, you guys are struggling just like we're struggling. You know, everybody has a struggle. And we need to really work with our elected officials at all levels, just like the commissioner was saying, to make sure that we advocate for common sense budgeting. You know, this across the board 2.5%, 2.25% cuts, you know, that sounds fair, but when you have social services that have borne the brunt of cuts for the past 10, maybe 20 years, that somehow isn't so fair. When we talk about shared sacrifice, I mean, just look at a pig and a chicken giving a contribution to breakfast. Who sacrificed, right? And who made a contribution? The chicken made a contribution, right? But that pig gave his all, right? So that's what I look at when I look at our budgeting process. You know, losers lose all. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Biggs. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Jenny Biggs. I live in Bridgeport, and I'm here for the education piece tonight. I have 3 children. They attend Sheridan Elementary School, which is a magnet school. It's part of Chicago Public Schools. In the past, before I was a mom, I was a teacher in the south suburbs. I taught high school science, so education has always been very near and dear to me. And now as a mom, I'm even more passionate, it appears. So about me locally and personally, like as a private citizen, I'm involved with the Bridgeport Alliance. I also served on the Neighborhood Advisory Council last school year, otherwise known as the NAC. The NACs were in charge of reviewing charter school proposals. I was actually on the McKinley Park NAC, even though I live in Bridgeport. How it worked last year was CPS claimed they were trying to solve overcrowding, and they said McKinley Park was overcrowded and you needed a new school, except this particular charter wanted to locate in West Bridgeport, so yeah. So anyway, I was very involved in reviewing the charter school proposal, meeting every week with our NAC to give feedback to CPS, and ultimately we recommended that the charter not be approved, basically because it was missing a lot of key ingredients, if you will, and ultimately CPS did not approve that charter. And I'm going to come back to talking about NACs later because you do have a few charter school proposals in your neighborhood, if not very close to you. So we'll need to come back to that. I was also very heavily involved in the local elections with Get Out the Vote and Poll Watcher over in the 11th Ward next door. So now citywide, my work with Raise Your Hand, I'm a board member and I'm also the volunteer coordinator. Raise Your Hand for Illinois Public Education started in 2010. We started around the issue of funding. Basically, we were going to have big, huge budget cuts. There were threats of 37 kids in a classroom, and parents took action and Raise Your Hand was born. Our mission is to help parents become advocates for their children by providing information on policies that impact them, building networks to share ideas, and creating tools to elicit change. Lately, we've been saying that our mission is to save public education in Chicago, mainly because a couple of years ago, Governor Rauner did say he wanted to blow up Chicago public schools, meaning the district. He totally wants it somehow totally changed. You guys can read behind the lines, and you know, we're seeing some movement towards what that might mean. The most important statement I think I can make on the Rauner budget cuts is that any cut that harms a family harms kids, which in turn harms communities, and it harms education. Schools do not exist in silos. They are part of communities, so when the community is hurting, the school is hurting. The school itself is made of the families. So when families are hurting, the school is hurting. That's, I think, the bottom line in terms of education. I've been reading through all the budget information. It appears that K through 12 education is supposed to be up by $300 million in Rauner's budget. I don't think we have any evidence of where that money is coming from, but that's what it says. I did see that higher education is cut by $387 million, which is huge and has a lot of our public universities worried. And obviously when we have K through 12 kids, that's where we hope we're going to get them, right? So regardless, it's going to impact them. I also took a look at Rauner's turnaround agenda, and I found I read the education part. Rauner wants to lift the charter cap. That means at this point, there's a limit to how many charters can be in the state of Illinois. So he wants to lift that, which means he wants more charter schools throughout the state, really. He wants to reduce funding disparities for public charters. So that means he wants to give them more money. And he wants to provide more quality educational options to students through tax credit scholarships, which you can basically read as something similar to vouchers, which again will, all of the things I just mentioned, we only have so much funds, right? So every time we keep saying more to different particular types of schools, we're just moving money from one type of school to another, or from one school to another, or one district to another. So in the end, all of us are being cheated out of fully resourced schools, no matter what type of school you go to. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned the turnaround agenda too, because that's something that we should probably all take a look at as well. Raise Your Hand is part of the Responsible Budget Coalition, and what that coalition is doing is saying that lawmakers have a choice. Right now, the choice is to cut budgets, but an alternate choice is to raise revenue, as opposed to cutting budgets. The Responsible Budget Coalition actually on Wednesday is having a day of action where they're using on social media the hashtag #ChooseRevenue and trying to give some alternate ideas to the budget cuts, such as a progressive income tax, raising the sales tax, etc. A good resource if you want to read more, Voices for Illinois Children, their Fiscal Policy Center has a good rundown of suggestions if you want to check that out. So choose revenue instead of cuts. So in Bill Drew's lovely description of me on the email that went out about this, he said, I was versed in the negatives of charter expansion, privatization, incessant testing, and financial mismanagement of the Chicago public schools. So thank you. And I'd like to just cover those really quickly too, because all of that is you know, in some way or another, yeah, it's CPS, but it's all tied to Springfield as well. So we need to be aware of this. So let's talk about charter expansion really quick. Or maybe not really quick, but we'll try. So where do I want to start? Every year, CPS has to issue a request for proposals for new schools. It's a state law, okay? Doesn't mean they have to approve all of them, but it's a state law, they have to put this out. But what we have found in all of our research and just being around all of the policy and the school board meetings and everything that we do, we've looked at data from the 2014-15 school year, and we found that there's currently 12,637 empty seats in existing charter schools. And this is based on the CPS threshold for ideal enrollment. So this equates to about 50% of Chicago charter schools, or 64 schools. So we have a lot of empty seats in charter schools. Since 2012, the CPS enrollment has dropped by 7,000 students. You're hearing, you know, a lot in the past week that we are in a fiscal crisis, that we're $1.1 billion in the hole in Chicago public schools. And also, if you recall, a couple years ago, we had an underutilization crisis. But yet, here we are. You can go right now to the CPS website and you can find the proposals for 20 new charter schools and 12 new alternative schools. And our argument is continuing to rapidly expand charters at a time of fiscal crisis and declining enrollment starves existing schools of needed resources. The money and students are not there to justify charter expansion. CPS has approved the opening of almost as many charters and contract schools as were closed 2 years ago. So I looked through the proposals today, and I found it looks like Noble High School is, I couldn't really tell where it wanted to locate. I didn't have time to pull up the proposals. A lot of times, though, they don't have within the proposals yet where they want to locate. That I know from being on the NAC sometimes comes later where they'll tell you they're going to be. But definitely there's like a list of targeted communities. That means who they want to recruit. And McKinley Park is definitely there for the Noble High School. There's also a charter school called STARS, which I believe is a K through 8, and they have written down Little Village, Brighton Park, and Archer Heights. And then there's Key Charter School, and it says Back of the Yard / New City. And I kind of looked at what New City was, and I think they're saying it's part of McKinley Park. But again, you have to kind of look in the proposals and try to figure it out. But pardon me? Oh, it has to be. It's part of Back of the Yards. Okay. And Back of the Yards is written a lot, and I'm not, like, again, I said on a NAC that said McKinley Park, but it was in Bridgeport. So, you know, it could be any neighborhood around you. So the reason why I bring this up especially is because you have until May 20th, which is a week from Wednesday, to fill out an application to be on a neighborhood advisory council to review charter schools proposals. And to participate in this whole process. You know what, I can definitely put the link to that on the Facebook invite for this so you guys have it. And I could definitely get it to Bill and maybe he can get it out to everyone. But even if you're kind of unsure, like, I don't know if I want to do this, maybe just put an application just to see. They have a southwest side NAC, a southeast side, a west side, and a north side. So they're going everywhere, and we need people on these neighborhood advisory councils to, you know, review the proposals. How is this tied to the state? This comes right to McKinley Park, to your Horizon Science Academy. That charter school was denied by CPS, and they went to the Illinois State Charter School Commission and were approved. This State Charter School Commission still exists, but in the House, they passed a bill, House Bill 397, that would abolish the Illinois State Charter School Commission. That passed already in the House. So now it's to the Senate. So what this Charter School Commission is, it's an unelected board, it's an appointed board, and they can look at any charter school proposal that's been rejected that fills out an appeal, and they can override the decision by the school board. So even we have an unelected school board, but even an elected school board in the suburbs can be overrode by this commission. I mean, it's a democracy issue. That doesn't even That's not even democratic. You can overrule elected officials. So if this is something you feel like really passionate about, give your senator a call and tell him to support House Bill 397. Okay, privatization. Our group has been very outspoken about the Aramark contract specifically, but we have also spoke up about a lot of different privatization methods, if you will, in Chicago public schools. Incessant testing. We are part of a coalition called More Than a Score, and this year we've been very active on fighting back against the state-mandated PARCC test. So if you are interested in that, I can speak to you about that afterwards. We are, yeah, that's been taking up a lot of our time this year. It's been very good. We've been networking with parents throughout the state, actually. And financial mismanagement, of course, you know about the federal investigation that Commissioner Garcia brought up. Yeah, we've been yelling about that since they signed that contract, because it was at that time that they closed 50 schools. They had just closed 50 schools, cut all of our budgets, and then they signed this no-bid $20 million contract, and we were like, what are you doing? Our schools need money. So, yeah, well, at least they've discovered it, and hopefully they'll discover more. But yes, this is what we do. We follow the policy. We try to educate parents to give them the information so they can advocate as well. So thank you so much for having me. And I will pass it to Ramon.
Hard to follow. Thank you. Well, thank you for coming out this beautiful evening. My name is Ramon Canolera. I work in North Lawndale. I used to live around the block here on Honorary, 3522. My family, extended family, is still there. 2 years ago, I moved to West Lawn, but I'm a Southsider. I grew up in back of the yards. North Lawndale or South Lawndale on 25th and Sacramento. Chicago Public Schools, went to Farragut for a couple of years, got in trouble. They sent me to Mexico just to get away from trouble. I acquired a disability later on in life, and that's what I'm here for, to talk about the needs or the crisis amongst the community of people with disabilities. So amongst people with disabilities, there are Asians, African Americans, Mexican Americans, but all that binds us amongst our group is the disability. The same inequalities that we heard about throughout time, and a lot of civil rights movements that we clinged on. Thanks to Dr. Martin Luther King, we started a movement which created the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. At this point with Rauner and a lot of, just around the country, we're going backwards. Instead of people with disabilities being integrated into the community, allowed to be integrated, we're just going back into the institutions, the clinical model that we refuse to live by. I'm representing a large group, just me, myself today. But as I got involved in the disability community, sports got me involved. But as sports, I developed a network. With this network, I started getting involved in advocacy. I didn't understand why people with disabilities were so upset. I mean, you guys get free rides, you guys get this check every month, you get free health care. Until I was a person with disability, I realized that it's just easier said than done. It doesn't work that way. With all this cutback, especially in the school, mental health, just getting people to transport to school or work if people want to do that in their lives, we're all being affected. We're just, some of the cutbacks are involving paratransit. Paratransit is those vans, the service vans that pick up people at curb. Right now, people are paying $3. They're talking about charging people $5 a ride. If you're on a fixed income of $750 a month and you pay rent, and you're not on Section 8 or any other subsidized housing, that if you can go to school 5 times a week, or any other event for, let's say, just once a week. So we're being affected. People with disabilities in the school system, especially parents, are losing. We lost already a lot of the services. Kids used to get physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy in schools. Now that's gone. Here in the McKinley Park area, the school kids with disabilities are sent to 51st and Western and some other schools throughout the city. The city, CPS, long time ago, they removed the segregation model. They wanted kids integrated in their communities. Fine, we thought it was great until we realized that kids were not thriving. They were being sent to regular schools with regular kids, which is awesome, but they were in the back of the room. When these teachers are overwhelmed with 37 or 30 kids and they got one special needs kid, all he needs is just a little bit more time, he or she. That's been taken away. At this point, we're really fighting. We really want to, as a community, we want to make sure that we're always present in any type of these events. That in general, all the needs of the community are just enhanced by us being a minority. Employment, we're at 75%. If you're African American or female, it's just you're not unemployable, regardless of what skills you may have. In the state of Illinois, as a person with disability, I have the privilege and the opportunity to have a college education, all paid for. While my vocational rehab programs, vocational rehab services are funded through the state with some little bit of federal money, but it's mandatory. Right now, the caseworkers are not taking people in. If I have some friends that are in UIC and SIU and U of I, and they're trying to be, paralegals, accountants, their tuitions are not being paid. Right now, the counselors are telling me there's a hole, there's a block, we don't know what's going to happen. So all these folks that already made it to that level, they just want the opportunity just to graduate, to keep going. They're on hold. They don't know what they're going to do. They're going to come back home to their communities with not finishing their, their degree, their career, whatever that they want to do. For children, again, they lost a lot of stuff in the community, in the schools. One of the things that we figure that kids don't get to play either. So besides, the necessary, just education and keeping the kids healthy, what about their mental health? What about how do kids with disabilities, if these schools are getting all these programs cut, there's no music for kids with disabilities. There's no sports. So there's a group of people that we're trying to get CPS to understand that kids need to participate in play. Playing is very important. So that's one of the things about that. Working with people who are very unemployable, because we talk about people who were born with disabilities, people who acquire disabilities later on in life. People who were born with disabilities, they always suffer. And I hate to use that word suffer because we don't suffer. It's not like we're in pain, we're not crying. We suffer in the fact that we're not really integrated. They don't think about us. They think about us as oh, wow, we forgot about these guys. Just bring them in. But who amongst in this crowd doesn't have a family, a member, or a friend who has a disability? Even if you don't, later on in life, you may be touched. It's just a matter of an accident, a chronic illness, and then we come, blind, deafness, paralysis, anything else may affect us. All the services are being cut at this point. So as an organization, Chuy Garcia, believe it or not, I worked with Chuy Garcia in the Little Village community, trying to get kids to stop killing each other and shooting each other. Another reason why people end up with disabilities, physical disabilities and mental disabilities, is the violence. And it's just out there. Kids don't have jobs. They don't have places to play, non-profit organizations who can provide them leadership skills, anything they need. The kids, what they do, they're just on the street playing. They get eaten up by the gangs. You have to live in the streets to understand where the power of these gangs come from. There's nothing else to do. When the parks are closed, libraries aren't really functioning. When you go to a school and they don't have the right tools, kids feel, I'm not learning. This is not fun. So Chuy, this time, we supported him. The people with independent living movement, we supported Chuy because we believed in what he does. The new mayor, he's helping out. Ex-Governor Quinn, he was a good ally. But again, there's all these budgets that needs to be addressed. Is it going to be resolved by taxes? We don't know. We just want to make sure that we, the guys at the bottom, we don't get the worst. We don't take up a lot of money, but we do need these opportunities. Again, I thank you for the opportunity. We're in the Facebook site. We're going to put some events are coming up. There are going to be rallies of people with disabilities. We're going to hit the Thompson Center. The Capitol. We're rallying everybody in the state, with just Chicago because there's more connection. But throughout the state, in some other areas, kids don't have opportunities. They get bused for 2-3 hours to a school. They spend more on the on transportation than in actual school. And when they're in school, they don't have enough services. And those kids, what's going to happen to those kids? They become us. They become young adults and become moms, dads with no opportunities. So now you're creating this class system. Charter schools is a great example. Charter schools, all those seats that Jenny mentioned those 7,000 seats that are empty. They cannot be filled by kids with disabilities. How many times have you seen a kid with one of those charter school uniforms in a wheelchair or with a disability? Charter schools kind of like, leave people behind, very systematically. They just, and we have real smart, you never know what a kid has until we give them an opportunity. So this charter school system doesn't work. CPS doesn't have money. So now we're creating these kids that we were, after all this fight with the ADA, civil rights, it's 2015 and we're going backwards. Generations are going to be, they don't know what's going on. I'm working with some of the military guys that are coming back from Afghanistan. They're coming back with wounds, missing legs, amputees, brain injuries. They're coming back and they talk to me and they say, well, I'm not disabled like you, and I understand, that's fine. I felt that way when I was recently introduced to the disabled world. But then they're facing other challenges. But they're coming back and they're realizing, well, what happened to all this, affirmative, that everybody can get a job, no discrimination in the workplace. What about accessibility? I thought everything was, parking. They're starting to see some of this, and these are folks, that served our country, and they're coming back and they're finally hitting it. And they're disabled. They get some VA rights, but we know how the VA treats them. Eventually these folks are going to be also without jobs. So it's really affecting everybody. Again, from the disability community, from the deaf community, which deaf is a culture. It's not, they don't want to be like us, but deaf community is a culture, and they're losing benefits. Kids who are deaf, if they're in school, they don't get the privilege to have a sign language interpreter. So how do they learn? So we segregate them back again into institutions that basically cater to folks, and they don't get to play with the regular kids. So we're going back, and that's not fair. That's not fair, and it's unfortunately it's all about money. The bottom line, there's got to be ways to go around it instead of on the backs of people who really need these opportunities. Parents with kids with disabilities, there's no education for folks. We have two centers in the city around this time. It's Access Living. It's one of the big centers for independent living. They have a ton of resources. Look it up, Access Living. It's free. They do advocacy, community integration. They have all kinds of information. But some of the parents are really struggling. Parents with kids with disabilities, they have their kids, when they're in Chicago public schools, they have to have a student individual plan. This plan follows the child until he graduates high school. Unfortunately, it kind of stops. With this program, the children are supposed to have all kinds of opportunities, health care, special education, all kinds of therapies to get people involved. All these things were cut. All these programs and services were cut. You affected not only the children, but all the other providers, the deaf sign language interpreters, the educators. Now the parents, they have to stay back home because they have a child that needs special attention. So now there's a breadwinner, there's lack of income, the community, houses start, the rent's up, the community suffers. So I think it's not fair that in 2015, we can pay for wars, we can pay this, for the technology that's useless, but we can't take care of our own. So thanks for coming out. My name is Ramon, and we'll be on Facebook and get us involved. There's a lot of more of us, so thank you for your time.
Thank you. My name is Lulu Martinez, and I'm here with Enlace Chicago. And actually, I want to introduce Cristina, who is with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and we're actually both going to be speaking on how the budget cuts are directly affecting immigrant communities across the state, and also specifically here in the city of Chicago. So like I mentioned, I'm the Immigration and Legal Services Coordinator with Enlace Chicago. And Enlace is a member organization of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, which is the agency that distributes the funding to, I believe, around 30 or more organizations across the state to provide different services to immigrant communities. That includes undocumented folks as well. And so for Enlace specifically, we're part of the, and I'm throwing out a lot of names because it's sort of like a flow chart, right, of the different services that a lot of organizations offer through very particular funding. And some of it gets recorded and some of it doesn't. And so when we're talking about the budget cuts, we're not just talking about the direct services that we're offering through the funding that is available, but how a lot of these organizations have to tap into this funding to provide other very needed direct services to our communities. And so for Enlace, we provide citizenship workshops with a collaborative, different organizations in the southwest side of Chicago. And through that, we were also able to open up the first free walk-in legal clinic in La Villita. And so about 85% of the folks that come into the legal clinic are inquiring about immigration relief, different types of immigration relief. Just in La Villita alone, for example, we have an estimated number of 20,000 undocumented immigrants, half of who would be eligible for the expansion of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and for the new program, DAPA, Deferred Action for Parental Accountability. And so through the New Americans Initiative, which specifically offers citizenship workshops for people who are eligible, we also tap into that type of funding to offer workshops on DAPA and DACA. A lot of the folks that come in are also requesting U visas, VAWA for women who are victims, survivors of domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. So as you can imagine, with these budget cuts, we're not just cutting the workshops that are being recorded and that are available to legal permanent residents, but also for a variety of immigrants who are in different legal stages as well. And so, and also the reason why a lot of this is important is because on a national scale, we have hundreds of thousands of people being deported daily, an average of, I think it's 1,100 people who are deported daily. So those numbers add up, and if we are able to tap into some of these services to service the most affected individuals, then you know, I think I'm seeing a lot of what the other folks have been saying about how this affects a number of people. And we know that some of the most vulnerable folks are undocumented folks. So if that's happening on a national level, and Chicago is supposed to be a safe haven for a lot of undocumented immigrants, what message is that sending out? And how are we as organizations and individuals who are advocating for more than what we're able to service now, what are we supposed to say to our communities as well? And not just that, but because a lot of these efforts are collective efforts with different organizations, that means that whatever funding is available, organizations are going to inevitably be pitted against one another to be able to acquire this type of funding and be able to provide, continue providing some of these services. And so just a small update as well. The particular line, the immigrant services line item, which is how a lot of the organizations are able to provide direct services to immigrant communities, was actually reinstated. So that brings up a lot of questions, both internally and collectively with the folks that we work with. But there was still a 26% cut, and that's just for fiscal year 2015. We're not sure what's going to happen moving forward, fiscal year 2016, and what steps we're going to be needing to take in order to continue providing some of these services. Some of the things that are being explored, for example, are fee-for-service models. So now that brings us into question like how we're going to be introducing that to a lot of our folks, right? A lot of our folks who, at least in La Villita, there are families who qualify for a free or reduced lunch. So that gives you an estimate or an understanding of economically where some of our families stand. So introducing a fee for service is both a difficult decision, but a decision that a lot of nonprofits, a lot of community organizations are being forced into taking to become more sustainable in the services that we offer, but also in moments like this when we see an incredible budget cut to a lot of our direct services. And so I'm going to pass it over to Christina, who's going to add on other information on how this is affecting immigrant communities.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes. So as Lulu said, thank you for the introduction. My name is Christina Tendilia. I'm a resident of Bridgeport. I'm also a proud founder of a Bridgeport Alliance, which over here. But currently right now I work as a community organizer with Asian Americans Advancing Justice. And the work that we do is mostly advocacy through research, education, and also coalition building. And so we work with a Pan-Asian American coalition of over 14 community organizations, and most of these are social service organizations that depend on state funding. And so something I do want to connect to what this woman said, we hear about, you know, different communities as they're receiving, as they're getting hit, it really is going to have an effect in other organizations and the community as a whole. You know, not only as a resident of Bridgeport, I also started this food pantry at a community center called Benton House. And we don't really get a lot of state funding, but we have, as we've seen cuts happen to the state, to the city, we see this influx of community members coming for help for different things that we don't even have capacity for, but especially with our food pantry. And so, you know, not only do the organizations have the same programs as the citizenship program, which is a huge asset to our community because it costs so much to apply for citizenship. I think it's over $600. And so we make it affordable and organize collectively, efficiently with other community organizations to help folks apply for your application, apply for citizenship, and guide them through that process. And a lot of these programs are done in language as well. And you know, just with the Asian American community, we have hundreds of languages. And so a lot of these programs are very unique. And so some of the things that we're hearing from legislators is, or we're sort of these different organizations are being pushed to think about consolidating, but really, it really is not for the best of our communities, as we have lots of different communities who have specific needs, and especially, you know, we want them to be culturally competent. And so not only is it, we also share the citizenship program, but a lot of our different organizations also get support from the Immigrant Family Resource Program, which also has been significantly cut. And some of the other programs outside of the immigration line item, which Lulu was talking about, that is sub-granted from the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, a lot of our organizations are hit in youth programming, youth jobs, different job programs, and you know, some of the ways that people fund their programs are affected. So for example, After School Matters is a city program, but one of our partners, this is how the program also gets funding from the state. And so it's very uncertain for them, especially because we don't know what's going to happen when fiscal 15 ends, which is what, a month and a half now. They don't know how to prepare for programming, and for a particular organization, the way that they run their free summer camp is through employing After School Matters youth. And so not only will they lose jobs for youth who will have a job that summer, but then also their grade school children will also not have a summer camp program. So really a lot of the impact that happens, we're really trying to capture that not only in stories, but also really putting together a comprehensive report that some of these numbers are not captured, and but just by looking at a budget, right? And so something that we're really trying to do as an advocacy organization, working with these social service organizations, is change the narrative around these programs are not a burden to our community, but actually really an investment. And when youth are able to have a place to be safe and also learn, that helps them, right? Helps grow the community. And same thing with folks who can get citizenship, have helped to become citizens. That opens them up to have opportunities, to have better job opportunities and contribute to their community. And so as we do this work, we've put together a report, and just for these 14 organizations, just for immigrant services alone, it's over $800,000 so far that we've tallied that's been cut from these 14 organizations. And this is all the way, an organization, we have them in different neighborhoods in Chicago, but then also in some suburban areas as far as Elgin. And so, as we're looking at the turnaround plan and looking at the broader picture in terms of where do our communities, which we are a part of some of these other communities with children are in our public schools, they're with the disability community, how do we fit there? And how can we make sure as social service agencies that we aren't used as bargaining chips and pitted up against other social service organizations or say unions, right? And we're also part of that community as well. So, something that we're really trying to work with other communities to collectively organize and make sure that, the wellness, the safety of our communities is not put at risk due to saying that we need to cut these programs in order to balance the budget. And also that we expect our legislators to work to develop some revenue solutions that aren't on the backs of the most vulnerable communities to alleviate our state budget crisis. And so that's the work that we're doing and making sure that we're not only fighting this, pushing back against this budget as Pan-Asian group or not only with immigrants, but also in solidarity with other communities, because we know that, the investment to these social service programs and youth programs are really what's good for the state of Illinois, and look forward to working with you all on that. So, thank you.
Okay, so we have a little bit less than 15 minutes left. Right, is that correct, Bill?
No, we can go till quarter till.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's much better. So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor for discussion, questions to our panelists, and then we'll also talk before we adjourn today about what you can do, how you can get involved in some of these advocacy efforts. When groups might be going down to Springfield to advocate, and when you can join them, and that sort of thing. So, questions?
So I have a question for you regarding what's your experience about how has it been being a member of the NAC? Because I'm a member of the LSCAB, but it's just an advisory board, and we're just there for, so that they can claim that they listen to people. How is that?
That's an excellent question. I would say the NAC is a process that they had community input. It's definitely part that. My experience overall was fine. I had to invest about 3 to 4 hours a week for probably about 6 to 8 weeks. We had weekly meetings. We had to plan a community meeting. We did not have to attend the actual hearings that CPS did, which I thought was weird, because that's kind of the thing that goes on record, et cetera. But I made sure that I did attend those, just personal. And also I talked among the other NAC members to make sure that one of us was there to put something on record. However, my NAC was different than other NACs. There were 2 other NACs, and one NAC was, how do I describe it? It was well orchestrated by CPS to ensure that the NAC would vote potentially that, yes, we back this proposal. That happened for sure on one. On another one, I didn't have too much contact with, but I was under the impression that there was some CPS funny business in that as well. I'll just put it that way. But there was definitely like the man who ran one of the NACs is the Stand for Children guy. Okay. So, and the NAC feeds you well, but that's funded by, who is that funded by? The, well, indirectly by the Walton Family Foundation. It's funded by New Schools for Chicago, who would get funding from Walton, I'm sure Gates, I'm sure Broad. So indirectly, you know, so yeah, it's a little, but you know, it's, we have an opportunity, and if you're able to, you should take it. Like I said, at the very least, put in an application and you can get the details and decide later. But we did, you know, we had allies on other NACs, and we would talk and compare notes, and yeah, that's how we rolled. And it was an interesting experience. I applied to be on the NAC again. We'll see, and they have responded to me, so apparently they seem to maybe want me. It depended. We only had 5, and then we lost one. She got mad and said it was a setup, and stormed out. And that was fine. But then there was one NAC that had like 18. So it kind of depended on the area and I don't even know what else, because also it's not like very clear cut as to what's going to happen. It's a little secretive as well.
Typical CPS stuff.
Yeah, typical. Correct. It's a recommendation that the NAC gives that's not binding. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
You know, several of you mentioned that the cuts will wind up costing society in monetary terms. And I wonder, can we push that out to the body politic? That would seem to be a great selling point. Have we made any efforts in that regard? It seems like absolutely crazy financially to make these cuts, because it's going to wind up costing down the road an immense amount of money.
I'll hand it, yeah. And actually, I wanted to comment on that. I mean, there are a lot of cuts that will actually generate greater costs. I mean, is this what you're talking about? For example, cutting Medicaid and how that'll drive people to emergency rooms and drive up the cost of emergency room care and things like that. Cutting mental health, right.
Pay in terms of, long-term health outcomes and mental health of kids who don't have adequate prenatal care. Right.
Yeah, I'll let Valerie comment on that.
I can remember being at a forum where we had people who were mental health professionals. They were looking at the fact that what Governor Rauner's plan does is it really forces more institutionalization rather than the community-based alternatives. And you end up spending about 4 or 5 times more for an institution, and you don't necessarily get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of outcomes. Science has shown that you get better outcomes when people are treated for those mental illnesses, at home, in an environment in the community. And then also what they're doing is they're taking those funds from community, local grassroots organizations and putting it in larger multi-million-dollar organizations that are the chosen few. I won't mention any names, but I get a sense from your nod that you know exactly the types of organizations that I'm talking about. So I think what we're seeing here is under Governor Rauner, in one fell swoop, he's causing the consolidation of the nonprofit industry, you know, across several sectors. We're also going to see probably higher rates of incarceration because as people can't get access to their medications, you know, they begin to do violent things. And I just hope that this summer we don't see Baltimore in Chicago.
Right, or an expansion of the prison system. I mean, because, you know, that's another potential outcome. You know, it'll drive a perceived need to reopen some of the prisons that have been closed down. And a lot of these are in areas, for example, in Southern Illinois that, you know, have lost jobs because of these prison shutdowns. And those residents have been very vocal with their legislators about the need to reopen some of those prisons to open up some of those jobs.
Sorry, unfortunately, like the prison system and the nursing home system and also the ICE detention centers are businesses, and that's where there's all the monies. That's where money should go. Instead of like helping kids, young men and women, especially young African American males, find opportunities, really, you know, have have leadership skills, you know, get away from all that bad influences that's in their lives or in the neighborhoods. If you go to a neighborhood and it's all destroyed, and there's nothing but empty lots and opportunities, you know, where do you make money? You leave the neighborhood, and the neighborhood goes with you. You go somewhere else, and they always see you as that person, even though you're not from there. So, and then nursing home industry, I think I'm glad you brought that up. And for people with disabilities, it costs an average of $41,000 to keep a person with a disability in a nursing home. And this is a person at high functioning that just, you know, that does not on a respirator, doesn't need 24-hour care. Just, let's say a person such as myself, that I can be independent if I had somewhere to go. With $21,000, $22,000, it's been proven that a person can thrive in their community they want to live in. With subsidized housing, somebody can go to their house and clean their places so people can go to school. You know, all of this is creating jobs in other places. The PA services, personal attendance services, that's a job for somebody. You know, all of these things, you know, the jail, the ICE detention centers, you know, that's crazy, the House state. So the Arizona law, the governor from Arizona, she was fighting not to keep, you know, to keep illegals away or undocumented folks away, but she actually wanted money because they've been keeping all these folks there. They want money for the federal. So it's a business, unfortunately. And Rauner, his background is nursing homes. You know, he's been selling business. He's a businessman, so he sees people as not people as or either liability or profit. And some groups we're liability because we cost money. And why not? It's just money well spent. Who knows, you know, the potential what's out there. So yeah, I'm glad. Thank you for bringing that up. And working in North Lawndale, working for one of the largest employers in North Lawndale. Yeah, we're seeing cutbacks even that affect people with disabilities. We don't have access to equipment for independence. Some doctors don't want to see us, or we can't go to certain doctors. So if I have my physician that worked with me for 10 years, and he or she knows about me, then I'm sent to a primary health provider because now I'm on HMO, that Medicaid gave everything away to the HMOs. I have a primary that doesn't know me. He's just a regular doctor. I go there with special needs because I have certain things. I have to educate the doctor. And sometimes I'm like, dude, you're a doctor. And those 10 minutes they give me after I waited 3 hours, you know, I can take it back. So yeah, it affects the quality of life. There's going to be disparities. You will see it already. So even with the Affordable Care Act, it's hard out there. I meet people in the rooms and I take them their paperwork and I say, well, you have insurance now. Your copay is going to be $1,500. Your out-of-pocket is $6,000. After $6,000, you're covered 100%. If you don't want to pay that, it's $1,500 a day. And the person is like, well, I have insurance. Yeah, well, yeah, we know. That's why we picked, you know, you're in here. But now people have all this cost. What happens in the family? It just trickles this domino effect. Somebody's got to give, and unfortunately us, it's the people, not the corporations or the big business. They're profiting off of us. Later on, we're all going to be begging. You know, the term handicap, we don't use it anymore in the community, in the disability community, because it goes back to where it's Civil War even, because not as far as that, but it started there. But back in World War I, when the soldiers came back, they were allowed to beg with the cap in their hand. So, you know, we're not beggars. People shouldn't be beggars, especially in the United States. People come from all over the world for the dream. And now the dream is turning into like the countries we come from. There's gonna be a class system. There's gonna be little islands of wealth just by surrounded by these oceans of just, you know, disparity. But, you know, we can live with it. Can we survive like that? No, I don't think so. Thank you. All right.
So one point about the need to spread the word about the human cost of these cuts and the increasing cost, you know, on the other end. I think that, you know, we do need to remind our legislators about that, but not only our legislators, but the legislators in other parts of the state, you know, maybe the suburbs where, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, on the forefront of their minds because they represent, you know, maybe more affluent or more privileged communities. And so, you know, they may vote according to the wishes of the people who live in those communities, and the issues that we're talking about may not be as visible. So I think that, you know, it's important when you're in Springfield, not only to talk to your own legislators, but, you know, to try to be a part of these advocacy groups, you know, to come together and show your power as part of these larger coalitions, you know, that can also reach out to those legislators that, you know, don't see these issues or don't have constituents who bring these issues to them every day. You know, they need to be reminded of the human cost. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I missed a little part of I came late, but this is a question for any of you. In light of the, I mean, there's many scandals. Like, I mean, in all the issues that you have talked about, just you know, talk about education. You know, the money is being wasted left and right. You know, you have the president of the board, you know, with conflict of interest. These people refuse themselves. Well, so I'm going to just excuse myself from voting, but still I'm going to give the contract. And they do that for millions and millions of dollars. In immigration, even though we're an immigrant community, you know, we still have deported an unprecedented number of immigrants. You know, with people with disability, you know, when even, you know, the programs that you mentioned are being cut, you know, like crazy. So in light of that, my question is, you know, how are those organizations oftentimes, you know, that are supposed to advocate for our communities to make sure that we advocate and inform communities? Sometimes they're part of, you know, making sure that we drink the Kool-Aid, right? That we say, you know what, it's bad, but it's not that bad. Because to be quite frank, you know, the reality is very harsh out there, and the level of discontent, it doesn't seem to match. So I just want to see, you know, how do you navigate that to make sure that the organizations are really informing the public as, you know, and working for the public, you know, reclaiming the public.
Yeah, and that's one of the purposes of this gathering, you know, to inform the public, because there isn't a lot of information out there about how these cuts are going to impact people. And unfortunately, you know, it might not be until after, you know, the cuts have their impact that people really feel what's going on. But I think there are a lot of us who have been working, you know, with the immigrant community, with the disabled community in education, you know, who can anticipate what the impact will be. And the more we spread the word about that, you know, the more we can take action. And there's not a lot of time left, right? May 31st is when they have to, you know, vote on this budget. You know, they have to pass this budget. And there are all kinds of negotiations going on within the legislature, right? You know, there are potential compromises that legislators can make because of this deadline and because of what Rauner is putting out there as, you know, a potential compromise. You know, he might consider increasing some revenues if, you know, they vote for these, you know, right to work zones, for example. And so, you know, these are some of the conversations that are going on that you need to be aware of, you know, when you talk to your legislators in Springfield, because, you know, there's not a lot of time, and we really need to get more people on board to, you know, go down there and advocate, because, yeah, these are going to be really painful, draconian cuts, and it's really going to hurt. So, yeah, let's, but I'll...
Really quick. Yeah. I don't know how much time I have, but I just wanted to sort of respond to what this gentleman said, and also Byron. But, you know, I think our work is really cut out for us, but it's important that we have spaces like this where, you know, we can let folks know how this affects our communities, right? Because it, you know, it's affecting the clients of these organizations, but again, it's going to have this effect that is going to affect us all throughout the state. And when we know that this battle is about the budget, but it's about something very long term and what's happening with our state. And so I think in terms of really trying to change the narrative that these programs are an investment, some specific ones. I know for the immigrant service line item that every dollar that you put into immigrant services, you get $5 back. Not a lot of people know that, and I think that similar sort of messaging was pushed out with the children's services. It was every dollar, $7 was the ROI for those services. And so I think that we have a lot of our work cut out for us to make sure that we're putting that out to community members, to legislators, and really educating them. But I think what you're talking about, Byron, I work in my experience working with some of these community organizations, you know, I think there really has to be a culture change in how we organize people and make sure that people who are directly affected, really engaging people, not just up to the lobby day that we have, but really all year, right? And not just up to the election day, but all year, and really helping develop people to say that, hey, this is your building, the state capitol is your building, these are your legislators, you should be able to articulate how you're directly affected as a constituent and as a a resident of someone who lives in Illinois. And so I think that is the hard work that we have to do to really take the time to do that, versus just mobilizing folks to come with us or to rally, but really having spaces like this to talk that out and to see the analysis of what Governor Rauner, when some of these elected officials are planning for our state, and making sure that people can understand this analysis and be a part of also not only just asking to push back on the budget, but also to present a new vision for our state. And so, so that was kind of something I was thinking about in terms of what you asked.
So we have four different questions. Why don't we ask the questions first and then just have everybody, answer whichever ones we can?
Okay. Of the $26 billion that was restored from the Good Friday cuts, I wanted to know who got the money back, and if any of the panelists, any of the groups that you guys represent on the panel got any of that money back.
I guess we can quickly, should I? Well, do you want to quickly?
Yeah, I know. Well, I know that a lot of the immigrant service item was restored. However, a lot of those organizations already had to lay off people, and so it's really tricky. So some of that money was given back, but does it make sense to restart up your program if come July you're going to have to close down again? And so that's sort of what happened. But it did not include some of these other programs, like I think Digital Divide and some other, I don't know if folks can kind of Teen Reach, which a lot of different organizations, including the immigrant organizations I work with, also get funding from. So.
I think one of the programs that was restored was the smoking cessation line, but they found out, after the program had been shut down. And so again, there's this question of, whether to restart it once the money's been restored. I think they also restored indigent funerals and the autism program funding, but you know, there's still a lot of programs that were affected and, you know, in a negative way.
Hi, I'm Bonnie, and I'm in the arts rather than social services. So I'm kind of looking at this from a PR perspective. I've been active in politics in West Virginia and here for a long time, and I'm like seeing all this minutia, and it's not getting across. And I know you guys are working like on the grassroots. You see grass, little blades of grass. What we need is some kind of overall thing. At the same time you're selling your grass seed, you've got to do that because your legislatures need to know what you're doing, but there needs to be like a big message, and I keep seeing a cartoon like, okay, it's going from little to big. All this money is going from little people to fat cats. And that overall message, I think, includes all this stuff. And if that message could be broadcast, and the corruption, I think you have to attack. You cannot just defend your programs as normally maybe you could. My sister's in social service. She's always having to defend her program. This is bigger than that, and you're gonna have to make these people darned uncomfortable. And the best way to do that is just keep talking about the corruption that keeps coming out, about Rauner and Rahm and all their buddies. And you know, we're not rerunning the election, but in some ways we are.
I think the message about the fat cats sometimes comes out when groups advocate for taxing, you know, the rich. So, you know, a progressive income tax and also financial transactions, you know, Wall Street tax and that sort of thing. So, you know, there are groups that are pushing that particular point. Let me just give that to you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I think that that's why it's really important to do, like Christina had said, to encourage like community members to be part of organizing efforts, because a lot of the work, like advocacy work that happens through nonprofits, are individuals that are providing these direct services and know what's happening, both in an indirect and direct way, but really the power of organizing in a grassroots way is unmeasurable, I believe. I have an organizing background before working at Enlace, and really the strides that the undocumented population has done through organizing efforts is incredible. Needless to say, that's both DACA and DAPA, you know, on a national scale. And so I can only imagine what that could mean on a statewide level if more grassroots organizing efforts and leadership development was happening, both happening within nonprofits, but outside of nonprofits as well. And just communicating with each other as neighbors, as individuals, and really creating, like Christina has said, this analysis, both for our governments, but also for the nonprofits that are providing those direct services for us. So I think that it's all the way around, right? Not just the government, but also the agencies, and pushing the agencies really to do more advocacy work.
Yeah, and I think it's important to reiterate that, you know, at the same time that you're talking to your legislators about the impact of the cuts and, you know, no cuts, we also have to be talking about the option of having them choose revenue, because that's really the only way that we can even get close to closing this gap. I mean, you know, we're talking about billions of dollars, and, you know, one of the reasons we have the gap in the first place is, you know, because we decreased our revenue stream, you know, on January 1st of this year. But also, you know, keep in mind that the impact, I mean, there's additional impact that we haven't even begun to talk about or think about that may come from the Supreme Court's decision about pension reform, right? So, you know, even though I mean, that decision just came down last week, and what it means for all of us is that the state has to find some way to pay down this pension obligation, and a lot of the money will probably come out of these budget items that we're talking about. So additional cuts is what we might be looking at. And, we are really talking about balancing the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable, and the poor in this state. And it's going to have widespread ramifications for everyone. So, we need to have this conversation about revenue and all the different places it can come from. It's kind of a taboo subject, so you really have to push it because legislators are afraid, that they're going to be targeted. This is a strategy on the part of Republicans in particular. If a legislator even mentions increasing taxes, they're going to run somebody against them and get rid of them and, run all kinds of attack ads saying, they want to raise taxes. But really what we're talking about is funding all of these essential services that are needed, right? So I think we had one last question, and then we're going to try to wrap it up.
Oh, hi. My name is Art Olson. I'm with the Hoyne Park Mural. We have a kind of a local project here just next to Hoyne Park, and we're trying to it's just some thoughts that were coming to mind while everyone was speaking, and it's just trying to connect communities with some of these issues that are really affecting us all. And we have an opportunity to working on a mural and on a kind of a micro craft level or a kind of a craft level where we can, work out different kinds of things. We work with school groups, so that small school groups, painting different areas of the wall. We've tried. We're getting some more experienced and accomplished artists that are working with us, and we got quite a lot done last year. Lots of volunteer days, and we're gearing up for some more activity this year. If anybody wants to sign up and get on our list, we've got a group page on Facebook and that kind of thing. Just find me. I've got a page you can sign.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we're just about to wrap up. I'm going to quickly pass the mic down to each of the speakers, and if you want to publicize an advocacy day or particularly a particular point about how folks can get involved, just mention it and pass the mic along.
Sure. Thank you, Teresa. So two things. I work with the PAVE Coalition, the Pan-Asian Coalition. We are having a press conference downtown on Monday, the 18th at 11 a.m. I can send, I don't know if there's a list here we can send information. Great. I'll put it on the Facebook page. And then we have a lobby day that is on May 21st. That's next Thursday. And so we are going down with not only with 450 of our community leaders in the Asian American immigrant community, but we're also going with an addition about collectively over 1,000 folks, part of the Equal Voices Network. And so if folks are interested in coming with us, please, you can talk to me after this. Otherwise, I'll put information about that on the page. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. I think this would be great to have in Little Village, actually. One of the things that we're concerned about, too, is that with such a large number of undocumented folks, that people don't know what rights they can exercise, and the fact that they can go and lobby, the fact that they can organize, the fact that they can protest, and things like that. So I'm open to organizing something like this in Little Village. If anybody here is a resident in the area or would like to get involved, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you to all the speakers. It was very interesting just to see how everybody's on their own, not silo, but their contribution to all of this matter. So for some of the events that we're going to be hosting or trying to organize on Wednesday the 13th at 3:45 on 201 East Randolph, there will be a march to a rally or march against state budget cuts for just access living, just in general. A lot of these programs. We're also going to be on the 22nd, holding a rally against paratransit, because all the cutbacks in CTA, even though CTA is supposed to be free for a lot of folks, where they're cutting a lot of services, which really doesn't allow people to participate in everyday life. Party, play, go to school. Anyways, and one last comment that it slipped my mind. One thing that needs to be addressed, and I'll be an advocate for that. I used to work I used to volunteer for a big funder of non-for-profits. I used to be a site reviewer, and I used to see some of these grants, and it was amazing what people would do for $25,000 for their program, for a specific program. However, non-for-profits need to also be reorganized, restructured. It's not fair to have some CEOs or presidents of these organizations making $100,000 of the money they get. Unfortunately, they may be worth that. However, we're not in those times where we can just give money to one individual to direct or seek more funding. The programs, the organizations seek to service the individuals, and the individuals should get most of that. Even though the organizations do a lot of hard work, believe me, grant writing and requesting money and setting up your organization, running programs is incredibly tough. But that's where it has to be reached. We can't have this money just being spent on 1, 2, or 3 individuals taking up a lot of the money. And at the end of the day, people with disabilities will tell you, so you guys get all these jobs, and everybody's a coordinator, everybody's a president, everybody's a director, and what do you give me? These forums or a handout. So people, I'm one of them, because we're upset. I try to deal with it. Go ahead, gotta go. But thank you very much for your time. Last one, please.
ilraiseyourhand.org. You can also find us on Twitter at ilraiseyourhand.
Hi, if you have any announcements, please send them to Bill. I do a newsletter. Usually I try to get one out once a week, just giving people updates as to what's going on with the budget and what's going on around, different actions. So if you could send it to Bill, Bill will send it to me, and then I'm sure he'll publish and I'll put it on my website as well. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for coming.